All right, guys, we're back again at the Dynamic Man podcast, episode 12, with Trina Nuance. And this is like a bootleg episode. I think you can tell I'm not in the regular location. I've been kicked out of my regular location. So we're gonna roll with it. Because we got a great topic today for you guys. So inspired by the recent viral post, be talking about mental loads, the mental load issue, right? Or is it this? And female neuroticism and the interplay of that with what I think is fair to call to some extent male autism. And not literal autism always, but just a typical male mind autism. And also talking about the interplay of male shame and female fear in relationships, and how this creates a lot of negative spirals that we see and a lot of talking past each other in relationships. So I know when we were backstage, Trina, you had a couple of things that were really coming to mind with that. So you want to jump in, tell us what you've been thinking about with male shame and female fear.
That's such a good angle for it. Pat brought this idea up, and my brain automatically went to, okay, when I've talked to men about their problems, a lot of it, or if not most of it, goes back to some very deep-rooted internalized shame around, we could say like repressed life force, like learned helplessness type things, right? Shame over like desires, just being a man that get really shamed by like the current cultural atmosphere. So then it messes with what they feel like is right or wrong, whether they're like, if they're trying to be a good guy, for example, and then they haven't like integrated those things about themselves, and they can carry shame for that. So it's an example. And then when I went the women's route, it was blew wide open, right? Just because firsthand, like neuroticism, we can say, is a huge main destination point of fear. And I don't think a lot of women would call it that,
Yeah.
but I think it really is in alignment with, or like anxiety, or the way that our imaginations can take off when the engine is fear, right? Like if I'm a woman, what's a really classic fear? Like a fear of abandonment. Why a woman might not resonate with calling it fear when she gets super neurotic as a way to cope with that is because the cope for fear is like control.
Yeah.
Right? So then it's like trying to control all of these different things in a structured, logical way, but the engine of it is really just like fear emotion. So it comes out as this like not orderly order neuroticism, like past the point of diminishing, or it's past the diminishing return point. So that's a really good lens. Was the first thought there.
Yeah, I think this is something that guys really just do not understand. I'm not saying that no guy has ever had like an abandonment fear. I'm sure that plenty of guys do, but it's not like, I don't think it's as that seems to be more of like a conditioned response in a guy, if he has it. Whereas I think it's kind of present in all women as some sort of program. It may not be like driving them crazy because they might have like a secure dynamic, but it's like a core, it's a core fear, it's a core motivation. And I don't think that guys don't get it. Like I can tell you that guys have no ability to parse how, if a woman asks him to do a task that's like really minor and insignificant, and he's like, well, this isn't a priority, I'm going to do something else instead, how that can make a lot of women feel, neglected, and can start to trigger like a cascade of thinking that you don't care about me, I can't trust you, you're not. Guys are like, what the fuck? What the fuck is, like, what are you talking about?
Wait, what you're saying though is maybe how we should talk about this right now, right?
Yeah.
Is you aren't talking from the male perspective. You aren't talking from the male perspective of the guy's shame thing.
Well,
You're talking
I'm
from,
gonna get into that. I'm gonna get into that.
but I think it might be cool to explore what it looks like from the other side, right? Because
Yeah.
we both talk about, like, I'll talk about like women's experience from the women's perspective. But you could also talk from the guy's perspective of the women, and then I could talk from the women's perspective of the guy.
Yeah,
Because
I think that'd be great. I think it'd
lost.
be great. So so guys have just no, they don't understand this, because to a guy, he's like, "You're fine, nothing happened. I'm still here. That action had no bearing whatsoever on how I feel about you. I just, like, I'm not connect like, the guy is not connecting that action to a woman's sense of safety and security in the relationship." Um, and so this is where the cascade comes in, though. So the woman, because she's afraid, she starts to freak out, criticize him, accuse him of things, and that makes the man feel like he's inadequate as, like, a provider or protector, and it creates a shame response in him, and it makes him feel like he's a failure, which makes him wanna retreat from the woman, which then triggers her shame, or which triggers her fear, rather. And so you can see how the cycle builds. And I don't know, you can tell me, but I don't think women understand how, like, criticizing and nagging and complaining about things that the guy doesn't do right, or trying to, like, correct him, um, like with driving, for instance, how these things, they trigger the same kind of shame response in a guy. And I think, and you tell me, right? But I think a lot of women, when they hear guys get, like, defensive about this, like, you're being disrespectful, they're like, "What are you talking about?" Like,
Mhm.
they don't understand it, the man, how it shames a man, because it's not that, it's like, in a similar sense, it's like it's not in their vocabulary for it. It's just, I'm just trying to be helpful, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I super, super agree, and that gets me in trouble, right? Like, if I have a bad perspective of you nagging him, then it sounds like I'm on his team.
Yeah.
But I have the same view as you, and this isn't because I haven't experienced trying it. So, like, when I think back to, yeah, I think that's my first serious relationship, if you could call it serious, like, in high school. My
Yeah.
first I love my high school sweetheart, and that's your first thing, and you're like, I was really insecure, and, like, and I tried nagging. And my other, and this is not a non-romantic example I'm saying, of my brother. I have a little brother, and we're really close, and I remember also being that during that arc, I would nag my brother.
Mm,
And, both of those experiences were, like, primordial, nag the man and see what happens, experiences. And I got bad results from both of them, but different types. And I'm gonna lead back to what
mm,
women are doing when they have a misguided attempt with their nagging. It's, my high school boyfriend would short term comply with the nagging.
yes.
Because and we're both coming from honorable places, right? I'm trying to get my needs met, like we're talking about. I'm scared of, losing you or whatever it is. So I'm nagging you to try to get that need met in a really obnoxious way. And because you're trying to meet that need for the woman, the male might respond by, like, complying with the nag. So then you create this feedback loop where I know that I can get my needs met via nagging. So I'm going to do it again. And then the man is going to be like, oh, I can get you to stop nagging me by complying with it. So that the feedback loop just strengthens and strengthens. But then what happens later is I'm just more and more, like, off in that trajectory of, like, nagging to get my needs met, which isn't a good thing. And then you are building up resentment because you keep complying with this bullshit feedback loop, right? As the man. So then things break down later. And then with my brother, it was different because, obviously this incentive of, like, that is totally different. It's my little brother,
Mhm,
but he wasn't receptive to nagging. And so there, it was a very primordial influence of, like, oh, if I want to be close to my little brother and have this, like, relationship that I imagine having as a sibling, I can't get through to him by nagging, and I can resonate with him because I don't like when I shut down and I rebel when my mom nags me. So I related to him. And then I, like, was like, okay, so if I want to be close to my brother, I can't nag him. And that's when I learned about, like, incentives and, like, being a little, and maybe lean into more of my, like, bro-y thing, whatever. But all this to say, both of those responded very differently. One was just like, no, I don't tolerate, like, if you want to be close with me, like, let's, that's not the way to do it. And the other one was like, okay, I'll deal with it. And then short term it was worked, but long term it was bad for us. So I think when women are trying to get their needs met through nagging, it's the positive reinforcement and just a misguided attempt to get their needs met, and the guy is trying to do that too, and they're just both doing it wrong.
Yeah, and I think what's a relevant point here between as a difference why there was even some degree of a difference between the two of them was because your little brother obviously was not interested in you romantically.
Yeah.
So it's like when you nag, he's just like, just get the fuck out of my face. Like I don't
Yeah.
want to talk. Whereas when you're with somebody who wants to sleep with you
Yeah.
and they want like intimacy, whatever with you, then there's an element of like there's an element of like performance that comes into the picture. It's like, well, I'm not like I'm doing something wrong. How do I correct it? And there's something here that a lot of guys don't want to admit, and and it's definitely not universally true. It's not universally true or equal across all women and all or like all relationships, let's say, in all situations. But women are often right about what they nag about. Like they're often right. They often do pick out something that could have been done and or could have been done better, especially if you're dealing with a competent woman. Those are the ones that obviously have the hardest time with this because they can see
It's fine.
done differently. But to your point, and this is the thing that these women have to understand, um, and the guys too, it's that it is a short-term best effective thing. Now, so a guy can be nagged into let's say I don't want to give the wrong impression here. If a guy is really like he's falling short on stuff or he's not aware, he's falling into like the male autism thing where he's really just not paying attention to things that need to be done. A woman's nagging can sort of help to mold some of this behavior, but is it the most effective route? I think this is a really interesting conversation, and I hope we can like expand on it in this show because in the long term, it always creates deep resentment between the man and the woman. And so I understand and I'm sympathetic to the woman's perspective where it's like, well, I'm supposed to let him lead, but he doesn't fucking like how am I supposed to just trust he's gonna do these things?
Yeah. She really
And
is just trying to help.
she's trying to help. And she's frustrated also because things aren't getting done necessarily always in an orderly fashion. And it's like there's so much subjective elements to this because some guys are genuinely are really spacey
Yeah.
and they actually might need some degree of instruction, but women also just go like way overboard with it,
Yeah.
and it creates so much resentment and depolarization of the dynamic. I'd like to say, and I think a lot of guys would love me to say, a woman shouldn't ever nag a guy about anything. Um, I think that there's some guys who are acting on the lead enough level that they probably don't deserve to be nagged ever. Because even if they make a mistake, it's minor. They have a very high agency.
That was such a good you illustrated that really well in writing on the thing that we're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah,
that like you're almost like
yeah,
narrating like how to calibrate it.
yeah. But I mean, but some guys really like suck at it, and I like if you're like we men and women, I think project their own whenever they hear this kind of stuff, they project their own experiences obviously into that dynamic, and the reality is it's there's a lot of different things going on, but I there is a certain point, right? We can at least say this because if you're a guy who's like okay, first of all, let me take a step back here for a second because neuroticism, female neuroticism and male autism, I'm using this term autism. I'm just going to use it. I'm going with it. I don't know what's better than it. They are consistently found together in relationships. The more like spaced out and not present a guy is, the more neurotic and crazy a woman is. And I don't think it's surprising that borderline personality women typically end up with guys who are really like super unaware of things going on around them. Like I've like Mark Darien a long time ago, he's a psychologist. He said it like the male inverse of borderline, which is kind of like a female personality disorder, is schizoid, which is like really like emotionally and like and almost physically detached,
Oh,
right?
that's so accurate.
It drives them crazy. It drives them crazy. So, you know, a lot of those guys are really kind and they have good intentions, but they don't seem to understand this fear that women have about based on how the man behaves in the relationship. And the borderline women certainly have no care whatsoever for the shame circuit that men have. Like they thrive on creating that shame, really.
They can't
Um,
even see it.
they can't even see it, and they don't want to see it. It doesn't matter because when you get to borderline level, everything is like it's pure exact like reality is exactly how she feels in a given moment, right? That's why I say it's like to me it's the most wild and dark expression of femininity, a borderline girl, which is why a lot of guys are drawn towards it because it's like completely untamable.
It's like
And
the worst vibrational version of like a challenge that the man
yeah,
needs.
yeah, a lot of these guys are like, "Oh, I can fix her, right? I can fix her." It's like there's nothing to fix. It's a constantly shape shifting, formless entity,
And the
right?
reason I say they can't even see it is because I think like whether she cares or not about that is like secondary to the fact where she can even like see it, you know?
Yeah,
Because if that her feedback loop is just, it's so antagonistic that it's bouncing off just her, then she can't even get to the part where she can look at it and decide to care.
yeah. No, it's 100%. It's 100%.
Yeah.
So, like, but I think if your relationship gets to a point where there's, like, it's become a problem or, like, this and we're hoping now that this is less extreme, right? That you're not dealing with borderline, you're not dealing with schizoid, you're dealing with just a guy who's maybe a little unaware about what a woman needs or how to be a man, and a woman who's a little unaware of, how to treat a man basically, and is, all in her head, she's really stressed out. The
So I have a question for you there.
Yeah.
When you're coaching a man on this, and like I'm a like, smart guys, right? Like because a lot of the guys you work with are like like smart, they can get a date, da, da. But do you how do I ask this? Like, how do you help them avoid uh the fear with all because with this like insight and clarity that you provide in this like say we're taking the angle of you know is this are you like positively reinforcing nagging, is this a borderline, whatever those things are, you create almost I would assume like an you create both clarity but you also make them more aware of something that's like a threat, right? So then is it just about them having the balls to like confront that heightened awareness to get around it? Does that make any
So
sense?
I think I'm gonna answer it, and correct me if I didn't go at exactly what you were looking for. So I always look for good faith and bad faith in the dynamic, and you really have like it's always like the grid. So you have women who are operating in good faith and they're aware of things, right? They're aware of what it is to be in bad faith, right? So that's the best. That's what you want. Like that's a woman. She wants things to move forward, and you can trust her. Then you have women who have good intentions but are like unaware of things they're doing that are creating bad blood.
Mm.
So for them, it's about being woken up. And then you have women who have bad intentions and are completely unaware. They're just trying to take, but they don't understand that they're even taking. Those are just parasites, and you want to stay away from them. And then this is a rare column. It's a rare column. You have the women who are also of negative intention, but they're very aware that they have negative intentions. And they'll usually warn you ahead of time that they do. Um,
I would say a risky statement and say I prefer those to the
yeah,
ones.
100% because no, I mean, how are you can't resent those ones really as much. You can't because they tell you and those are the ones that are like the kind of like typically like the sexy toxic ones typically. We won't go down that rabbit hole. Won't go down that. That's a deep one. But so
I'm having girl talk flashbacks.
Well, maybe
Yeah.
we will. Maybe we'll go down it.
Prerequisite for that you just went back to in response to my question. Yeah, that's really good. Because before you can ask, you know, how am I approaching this uh, threat, you have to ask whether the threat is coming from a place that you can work with or not.
This topic of like good faith and bad faith. I mean, and it's I did like a show on here a little bit ago, and it's like outlining the sort of three tenets, right, of facing fear, expanding awareness, and operating in good faith. Like, I think this is the blind spot that people have. Like, people are like, "I'll learn skills to get women," or whatever, or they're like, "Yeah, you got to put yourself out there." Like, they understand that, but this whole idea of dealing with people who are good intentioned or bad intentioned, or you have sometimes in the middle where they're ignorant and they're creating bad intentions because of that. And the question is, can you move them? Like, can you, if, are they willing to learn, or do they want to stay in ignorance? But the bottom line is, if you're dealing with somebody who wants to improve and wants to change, and they have good intentions for you, right? And you can you can work with that person. You can work with that person. Um, Doesn't mean that it might not, depending on how much they're motivated, it doesn't mean it's not gonna be frustrating at times, and I'm not saying that even if they have good intentions, you always have to stay with them, because sometimes it can be just too much. You just you don't wanna deal with it anymore, right? I'm not trying to tell people what they have to do, but where there's a will, there's a way, and good intentions shows that there's trust. You can do something with that person. Sometimes what happens, though, is the guy finds out he's actually with a woman who was never operating in good faith. It was always a parasitic dynamic, and she's never gonna change that. She doesn't wanna change because she wants to take energy from you. That was her objective to begin with. So, um, then they gotta go. Now, I feel like I've lost some of the train of thought of like of specifically
No,
what.
no, that was good. You're talking about like this is the main core root thing that people struggle with, is the faith discernment that you are clarifying is the angle. And I think you're right because it leads to so much like if it's a parasitic energy and then they have to discern between that and uh an energy that is operating in good faith but is just something they can't deal with, then it almost circles us back to my initial question because it's like that's where all the associations get muddy, right? Say your past core experience, your first relationship or your mother, question mark, like, those were the core things, then that can be like the trajectory of like what we would call like avoidant attachment style and shit like that, you know? So,
Yeah. No, attachment styles are 100%,
no,
like,
you're really, yeah, that's a crazy first place to start with it.
and a lot of it is overcoming the attachment styles, right? And that's can only be done with awareness. It can only be done with awareness.
And
Uh,
let's get woo-woo for a second. Good faith and bad faith, if you're not like, if you haven't done any um inner work to like get aligned or clarify your energy or whatever it is, and you're just like drowning in programming, then you can't rely on a sense, like almost a vibe check of good faith, bad faith. So then it has to become this thing of like signals, which obviously like play a role no matter what. But that's what's so compromised now because there's so much noise, right?
Ye yes. People have all these programs, and I mean, one of the things, like, when we talk about, like, even what we've been referring to right now, like, issues in relationship, I mean, you know, these, like, radical iterations of feminism, I mean, this kinda stuff has 100% created, like, entitled programming in a lot of women and, pathetic programming in a lot of men. So, you have a lot of men who don't have a backbone and don't have really agency. They're used to acting like babies, and you have a lot of women who are used to acting like mothers to the babies, and it's just like it's a disaster. And a lot of women, even if they're like they want to change this, and the man wants to change, they're gonna still have these hangups. Like, what do you mean? I'm just supposed to like Like, I want a man who's gonna lead, right? Like, there are some women who are trying to consciously break out of the programming, and they say, "I want a man who's gonna lead," and then you say, "Okay, well, then you need to let him lead." You're like, "Well, what if he's messing up? I'm just supposed to let him mess up?" Like, "Yeah, you are." And they have a really hard time
Oh,
dealing
it's
with
no, it really is
really hard time dealing with
genuinely that genuinely is really hard to ask of us, but yes.
it. It is, it's super hard. No, and I'm genuinely, like, empathetic to it. But
That also points to, like, the IQ gap, right? Like, it's really I think it's a really big compromise if there's too much of an IQ gap for a similar reason you're illustrating there is because if, like, it's one thing to ask her to let him, like, mess up for a decision and not be neurotic, and then it's another thing for them to be, like, very, very large gap in, like, either self-development or intelligence or whatever it is, and then,
well, here's where it is, Trina, the reason it is 100% more difficult, but the reason it's so difficult is not necessarily the IQ, it's that egos naturally attach themselves to IQ. So, a
yeah, but, like, when you turn your like, but if she has if you have felt healthy feminine energy, you're just kinda just turning your brain off.
that's what I mean, right? So you could have a really
Yeah,
intelligent
you're right, yeah.
woman who doesn't identify with her IQ. She doesn't she wants to just vibe. And, I dated a girl like that. Like, my high school girlfriend was actually a lot like that. Um, she was very intelligent, and you could see that because of how she did on her tests, right? Like, very, very academically brilliant, person. But she was not intellectual at all. She was not curious, and she never tried to be, like, right. And she had other issues, right? But that was not one of her big things. Maybe that developed over time, but I'll just say that wasn't the case at that moment.
Mhm.
Um, and
Yeah, I hope that's implied about all anecdotes we use.
yeah, yeah, I mean, I have no idea. It's been like 20 years, you know what I mean? I have no idea.
Yeah,
I'm sure
yeah,
things have changed, right?
yeah.
She was a very great girl. But, uh, so the issue is that a lot of these women and men of course do it too, but it's a little less harmful in the relationship dynamic, at least in this sense, that a lot of the women will, when they start to attach identity to their IQ, like, I'm really smart, I know how to get all this stuff done, they bring that into a relationship. Really, like, the women who have impressed me the most, and I've met a handful of them, and they're so radiant. They're so feminine, they're so radiant, but they also, like, they've, like, run companies. And they say it's just they know how to compartmentalize it. They don't bring it into their relationships, and they don't not even just, like, obviously with someone who they're with romantically, but not even into, like, a social environment, right? They still emanate that feminine energy, but when they're in a job and a role, they're able to tap into it and do that compartmentalization. I think that is mastery, right? When a man or a woman is able to tap into that different energy in an appropriate context, right? But the first step of it is understanding what context it's not appropriate in if you want to create the right energy for it. So I think it's the ego aspect that gets people anchored. Like, humility is such a gateway to change. It's such a gateway to change.
It's what you're painting is, like, almost an agility with your ego, right? Like, if your ego can in the last episode we did together, we talked about how in a healthy feminine energy in the relationship context, you could say that her ego is set up to making your life better, and expressions of that might be cooking, cleaning, or being pleasant, right? But if it's outside the relationship context, then her ego in what you're talking about isn't tied up to the same thing. It's tied up to something different because it's in a different context,
Yeah.
you know? So it's just like an agility with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
And
almost like the dance that you talk about in relationships, but instead it's like inside, like it's an internal thing.
yeah, I mean, and I think a lot of women, they don't actually know what and I don't think men do either, for the record. I think it's like it's been like this, like, genocide, like, we don't understand what feminine energy is. It's like a really, really foreign concept. Um, it really is this like total surrender and trust and allowing things to come to you. And I can tell you as a guy, like when you are around a woman who is really feminine, it just motivates you to want to do things for them. You know what I mean? Like, and you're
Mhm.
happy to do it because there's no, you're actually like, rather than being shamed, right? You're being validated. So it's like, and this is we get into like the long term, short term,
Mhm.
um, what is a positively reinforcing cycle versus what's a negatively reinforcing cycle. It's really easy to nag in the short term and you get the guy to do this thing. But then every subsequent task, you're going to get more resistance from him. Or even if you don't, in the sense that he's learned from it and he's doing those tasks, the resentment towards you is still there.
Mhm.
And so then you have to get rid of the poison in the dynamic. I will say this though, I think it's a very big ask, especially in the environment, and some guys will give me crap for this, it is what it is. I think it's a very big ask for a guy to want a woman to surrender when he's really just, like, and to give him all these, like, feminine gifts and whatever, when he's just, like, really not paying attention to anything, when he's really not aware of, like, he's not operating on, not, I mean, not all cylinders, but most cylinders, right? He knows what needs to be done and he's doing it. Once a man is in that mode where he's like paying attention to things that have to be done, he has self-awareness, then I think it becomes a very, very real conversation. And I think the guy's frame at that point is such that when if a woman is to like nag him about stuff, he can really be like, no,
Mhm.
like I'm not doing this. You
Yeah.
need to get this under control,
Yeah,
basically,
it's
or
almost like, even if his nature is to not be paying attention, it's almost like if he doesn't actively fight that version of, like, um it's almost like a version of complacency, right? If to
yeah,
not pay attention. So you have to be intentional with it, and then if the female corollary might be, like, it's her natural instinct to, like, notice all these little details that and be detail oriented in a way that would invite, like, nagging or whatever it is, and she has to, you know, actively chill instead of
yeah.
actively pay attention.
Well, it's like, as a man, you should know as a man when you're really doing what you're supposed to do, and, if she's nagging you, you've gotten some indication of things that she needs, right? And if you're operating in good faith yourself, you're gonna get to a certain point when you're like, I'm already pulling my weight, and I know that I'm pulling my weight, and this stuff is like a problem in your mind that you have to get, like, this is miserable. I'm not dealing with it anymore. I'm not
That
getting into it.
and what and people, like, whether they do it at the beginning or they get to a point of this because of the bad feedback loop, I think it's really, really unreasonable or maybe always a deal breaker for anyone to have a 0 tolerance on this, right? Like, she's always like, even in healthy, happy relationships, like, she's gonna nag a little and he's gonna not pay attention every time he needs to. Nobody's allowed, like, it's so unrealistic to expect perfection from anyone, right? So but then when you get to that place where you are 0 tolerance because all of this bullshit has been happening, that sucks and everything breaks down. But let's talk about, like, culturally now it is reinforced by culture for people to have 0 tolerance fresh out the gate, right?
Yes.
Like, if you can think of like a like a social media clip or something where it's like, if he does XYZ, bye.
Yeah.
Or the
Yeah.
guy who's like, oh my God, if that's a thing with her, like, red flag. Like, it's so interesting. And it's not like those things aren't true. But again, we're talking about this, like, discernment issue and these, like, how it's gotten muddy for everybody because of those things. Like, it's almost like people are so extreme with it to where there's no place to collab, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. No, you're totally right, and a lot of that stuff is that gets into, like, a whole other issue, which is men and women have such low trust in general for each other. They're so burned that they really, in some sense, are looking for reasons not to have to put themselves out there or not to have to connect because connection is scary. Like there's all this sort of like I don't know whether it's strictly avoidance or whether it's getting to the point where it's like everybody has like like more and more people have this kind of disorganized attachment, which
Yeah.
when they wrote that book, they said only 5% of the population has it. I guarantee that that is not the case.
Oh, really?
I guarantee it's a lot more than 5% of the
When
population.
was do you know when that book came out?
Over a decade ago, but not more than 2.
Oh my god, I would definitely agree with you that I would assume that just with everything getting so muddy.
Yeah, I mean, the way that people are acting typically is very much in a disorganized fashion, where it's like you want to get close, but then you push them away. You want to get close, then you push them away, and it's this kind of back and forth thing. But there's definitely a proliferation of attachment styles in general that are like not secure, um, because they don't want to give people the chance. There's always a reason to disqualify somebody, and the internet feeds that. Because everybody can just pile their neurosis on there. It's why, both of us, I think what we do is great because we're always looking for context. And the reality is that, like, when we talk about these topics, somebody could be like, "That's me." You know what I mean? This is my relationship. And then I hear about the relationship. I'm like, "No, you really are just not paying attention to things. Like, she's really asking you to do this stuff, and you just refuse to do it because you can't see it." And you have to start doing it if you want her to calm down. So it's like it's on you. And that's conversations I have with guys. And then other guys are she's just I keep trying to do this, she's just not happy. And I want to keep working at it. I want to know what I have to do to be better. And I look at it, I'm like, man, you fucking like get some fucking standards. Like
Mhm.
you're a doormat. It's time for you to put up some real boundaries around her. So there's like a context difference. But
I think that's why the context thing is all of it's the same to me, where it's like increase in disorganized attachment style with all of the noise of internet and feedback loops and social things is the same thing. I think both of those things are the same in as the reason why our like different fixations on context and
mhm,
like nuance and stuff is so powerful now because there's so many variables now, right?
yeah.
Like whether we're talking about like feminine and masculine roles or feedback loops and people collecting variable experiences or whether what they each do in their life, like or internet, like there's just so many different variables that like you can't really help somebody unless you can like appreciate that there's more than that there's multiple variables to some degree.
Yeah. No, I mean, I 100% agree with that. I do think, unfortunately, a lot of people, and they're not our audience, but a lot of people are not. They like the extremes. They're not looking for context. They're not really look solution oriented. Um,
Kind of crazy.
they like to have their little monologue that they repeat over and over again, and then it creates a reality for them, and then they're miserable.
It makes
And
me so sad. I think I told you on an earlier, maybe our first conversation on your podcast, about that like little anecdote that one of my chick friends had to like confront me about, like when she would open up about problems and I would just like talk about solutions and how I had to like learn, almost like the guy has to learn, and then also taught me about myself and like what I sometimes need. Like I just need to be heard. Like I don't necessarily. I remember one of my friends one time I was like bitching about a work situation. He was like, maybe you just don't feel appreciated, and I was like, no, that's not it. And I remember, and then that anecdote happened with my friend, and I was like, oh, maybe I just need to be heard and feel heard. But the reason I say that is like it's a fear. Uh, Also, going back to like the beginning, right? Fear and shame. Um, uh, the all the things that we get exposed to on the internet. Like I'm gonna go back because we talked a little bit about the guy thing. Um, like first of all, the internet is just really fear triggering for people. And I think as the feminine, like if we could call that fear not being appreciated or not being heard, then another like external feedback loop that exists that like stokes the neuroticism on the feminine side is um there's now, like, you know how, like, we have parasocial, it's almost, have you seen the movie Avatar?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I almost feel like women have this relationship with online life
Mhm.
has added this whole additional layer of, like, women are were already having, like, identity crisis and wounded feminine and insecurities and fear just as feminine creatures, right? And I'm just talking about women right now, otherwise I'm gonna go off on a million nuances. And now that we have the internet thing too, I almost think there's like a parallel between, like, when you have a parasocial relationship with somebody, that's a different thing than having the real life relationship with them. And I think women have this almost like weird identity parasocial thing with their online selves, even if they don't have an online self, right? For example, if she fears that she's not beautiful and that she has like an Instagram where she, like, gets validation for feeling beautiful, then she can collect all of her validation for feeling beautiful and taking care of that fear through that, like, avatar. But then
Mhm.
she almost has like a parasocial relationship with her sense of self-worth via beauty.
Yes.
And
Yes.
if a woman, and the same problem can be for the woman who doesn't have an Instagram profile where she collects validation for feeling beauty, but then her ghost parasocial relationship with her beauty is like, wow, I don't feel as beautiful as this woman who collects all this validation through feeling beautiful, blah blah blah. And I'm all of this is to say, just more to the point of how noisy it's gotten, right? Because women have to go, like, and I'm just talking about women, like, going through all these different tunnels of how do I get to the part where I'm like strengthening my core self, maybe like fat, um, it's so messy. Like, I talked to, because both
Tell us
struggle
a
with it.
story. Tell us a story. You have a story.
I know, but I always worry about, like, these anecdotes. I always feel like I'm telling secrets. I was talking to this woman, and she wants to be an online fitness coach. And she works in it's pretty red pill. She's a nurse, and she's crying. She's telling me about this crazy shit that she, like, experiences at her day job nursing, and some really fucked up stuff. Like, sorry, messed, like, um, things that, like, if I just said it out loud, like, maybe we'll get blacklisted on YouTube
No, it's
because
all right.
that,
It's all right.
points to opinions we share about, like, the system being not good for people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then, obviously I get it. So, like, she feels really comfortable talking to me about it in this call. Anyways, the whole point is she wants to grow the balls to, like, create this online presence and, like, help people and have, like, a health coaching thing and help you, like, nutrition. Da, da, da. And her issue isn't, some of the fear mongering on the male side is, oh, like, these chicks just get validation through Instagram all day. And, if a chick posts the same wisdom a guy posts, she just pops off because it's beauty, right? And, like, you and I have discussed that before. And, like, yeah, that's true. But then I also talk to the women who, like, who literally struggle in response to the same thing, but they want to use that in, like, a really beautiful way.
Mhm.
And their feedback loop is like they continue feeling insecure because they're, like, just watching it happen. And,
Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean watching what happen?
like, they don't have this avatar that they collect validation through. And they all
Do they
and
feel insecure because they see the other women's avatar?
yeah, meanwhile, the
Collecting
women with the
validation.
avatar are insecure in a different way, but it just looks like they have all this beauty
Mhm.
validation, and it's so sad because they're just both insecure over, like, a similar axiom. They're just standing in two different, like, vantage points. And the core desire is feeling worthy
Mhm.
and, like, trying to get that met, um, and needing to circumvent it through this, like, other world that is now really relevant to the regular world.
So the only women who are healthy then are ones who aren't on social media. I mean, I'm being,
No,
hyperbolic.
like, yeah, you can definitely, like, say it. I of course, my brain goes to it. Well, I think that a lot of the arguments about negative effects of social media on women are very valid, but I don't think it's a solution to
Yeah.
say that, like, just I'll get all the women off the internet. I think that's what the challenge is now. When you talk about golden age, I think
Mhm.
the reason so much shit is breaking down and speeding up via AI, via everybody's tired of the like million followers chick who like doesn't look like that in person and sucks in person, or like the guy with the purple Lambo who actually makes no money, right? That everybody's used to watch them and it's like, oh my God, she's beautiful. Oh my God, he's rich. And all of those like veils are falling because of the avatars. If I had to make a woo-woo stupid prediction, I would say the reason all of that is happening is because we're being challenged to integrate this world and that world. And the solution is not return to the past when like
It's not gonna happen.
it's just not realistic.
Not
I
happening.
understand everybody escapes to the past as a solution because yes, women are handling it terribly and so are men in different ways. But I don't. That's the challenge. We have to rise above that. We don't get to go back. Sorry.
We need to look to the past because there were things that we threw away that we shouldn't have thrown away, and we have to come and reclaim it as part of who we are.
Yeah.
But it's not. We're not going back. Like going back there. Consciousness, human consciousness, is not able to go back there. We would have to have some total calamity like Tower of Babel kind of thing. Everything goes down. Some people think that's going to happen. Okay, well maybe that happens, and then you're right. We won't be able to talk about it, but we'll find out, right? Our grandkids will find out. But in all like seriousness, we are moving to technological singularity, and it is forcing people to integrate. And I think what you just said was really so important. I mean, I just saw it today. Um, it's like an AI OnlyFans. It was on Twitter. It was like an AI OnlyFans girl, and she's like talking, and she's doing like all the things that some like Instagram girl is doing. And she's going to the gym. What do you think about this top? It's fucking AI, and obviously she's hot. So it's like, what's gonna happen to all the women who've been selling, whose identities have been based around I'm hot and people look at me, when they're never gonna be able to compete with a perfect AI girl. So what does that mean? Well, I think it means that they need to start to develop an identity beyond that.
It's so
But,
sad.
you know, it doesn't mean that beauty isn't important, but it's not about beauty so much as it's vanity, right? That really drives a lot of the social media behavior.
And it's
Um,
messing with the real life flesh too. Look at all the chicks with botched faces.
mhm.
Because they keep using this filter and now they can't even see their own face and overcome the challenge of natural and of looking at natural beauty and like watching a wrinkle develop or watching your lips be thinner than somebody else's or whatever it is, right? Like, and now you can just pay to fix that. And it's so sad. So I really like I'm always like authenticity, and like there's so many liabilities that come with authenticity, whether you're talking like vanity or speech or whatever it is. But I think we all have to take those risks. Like you take those risks, I did. But I think like it's really, really, really important because that's the only way to do it. Otherwise, the other direction is what everybody's doing, which is really getting really messed up in both worlds.
Yeah, it's a black hole. I mean, and really, it's like we have these collective little ships. We're like, don't go too close, like you go too close, it's over. It's over. Like people's entire lives just completely empty. Um, and this stuff gets brought into relationships for sure. I mean, I'm a romantic, and so as a romantic, it means romantics are idealists, right? So I look to an ideal, and I believe in that both on an individual level and on a romantic level. But it is interesting, there are traps to idealism, which is like a perfectionism and projecting. It's healthy to have standards, it's healthy to have a growth mindset. It's unhealthy to find fault and everything around you and to, lose compassion in the process. So I think that's something that certainly gets brought into relationships as well. The internet gets brought into these relationships and feeds these cycles. So you have, women who are on one hand looking at maybe a perfect relationship online from some celebrity, and then they're being told that they deserve it all too, that they deserve this. First off, to the extent that that relationship image that's seen is actually real and not just an image. What's more than that is that if it was a real and healthy relationship, those people really did some work to get there, and they took it. I don't really care who you are. There's not a single person that has a really healthy relationship. I don't want to say single person. Like we can never. You and I can never say these things.
I
But
know.
it's basically nobody has really healthy relationships without awareness of each other. I mean, it could be like a proto awareness where they really sync so well with a particular person, and it's like a very simple understanding of each other that's filled with like a lot of grace and compassion. Like, but the really really great relationships, there's always like self acknowledgement of like acknowledgement of individual flaws. It's maybe just humility. Maybe just humility. Maybe humility is really just it.
Yeah, I know. I think it's humility, and they've created their own world.
Mhm.
Like that can. But I want to go back to before I lose this because I thought of a really cool. I think it's cool. What you just said about I'm an idealist too. I don't always show up as that like perspective because I don't think it's always it's definitely not always effective, but I am and for some reason when you said that and then I thought about how it resonated, I thought about, you said male shame and female fear. And then uh if you were to talk about idealism from the lens of male shame and female fear with respect to this like parasocial avatar world that we're talking about, I think it perpetuates that negative feedback loop. And this is how. For the man, his idealism might be I'm avoiding this situation with an idealist private vision that I have a little bit of shame of surviving the situation with, and I'm avoiding the reality of it. If we were to say the masculine might lean avoidant, whereas the woman, and this might support your point of like, oh, I think she wants to save him, like with the virginity weird like thing that I didn't really get, but it kind of supports. Is the woman is fear. She might have that fantasy, but she projects it on it versus avoid.
Yes.
Right. And then she's the anxious. So she's projecting it on him and he's using the projection away from the dynamic to cope. And this gets perpetuated with the internet.
Yeah, I think there's a typical anxious avoidant dynamic between men and women, but I don't know that it's exactly like a full on attachment style thing because the guy may withdraw as a result of, let's say, getting criticized for not being perfect, but he may want to still connect with her. It's just that he feels rejected for connecting with her. Like she can actually, in some ways, be avoidant in like an attached manner. She may not want to be close to him. She may just kind of withdraw a lot of attention from him, and say, "Hey, you're not, you messed things up," basically. And the guy may chase after her. So there's different ways it can manifest, but in the acute moment, the acute response to a woman criticizing a man is his withdrawal. Like he will go internally. Or he'll get angry and yell back at her and it'll become really like explosive.
Yeah.
But it's men typically just internalize that because it's shame, and shame makes you feel like internalized. And yeah, in order to like you have to respectively confront it. Like a man has to confront his sense of being shamed and be like, okay, I'm going to take ownership, I'm going to take responsibility. Maybe I messed up, I'm going to do better, right? Those are the guys who can escape from the cycle because they're actually trying to overcome the things that are causing them shames. They're trying to become better protectors, providers, whatever. In the same manner, women who are able to confront their fear of being abandoned and say, no, I'm going to trust him. I'm going to let go. Everything's going to be okay. They, in the same way, are able to gain their confidence. And I'd love to actually, Trina, if you can go and talk about this, because I know, like for men, and Adam Lane Smith has a great post. I mean, he's reposted it like 40 times now, so he's kind of like squeezed that. I love it. I love you, Adam, but like kind of squeeze that orange for everything it's worth.
Which one?
About I think I should be able to do it verbatim now because he's done it so many times. But which I'm not gonna be able to do.
You
But
might just have,
basically,
like, hired somebody on Twitter to, like
look, I know what it is. I think maybe he may who knows, right? But basically how modern therapy teaches, like, men to share about their feelings and stuff, but the real root of men, like, male mental illness and depression is feeling powerless.
Yes, I've seen that tweet a lot too. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
totally.
he's totally right, it's a really brilliant insight.
But
And yeah, but it's retweeted but it's retweeted too many times. Rephrase it at least, you know what I mean? But I guess, hey, look, if it's good, if you got a banger, why change it? But, it's he so men, when they take on more responsibility, they take on more risk, they accumulate more personal power, they really do feel better about themselves. Like, you can feel like the masculinity gets charged, and because man, it's the masculine is supposed to deal with matter, right? But for women, and this is something, this is such, like, the big block, and I would love for you to talk about it because it's different for, like, a woman doing something because she loves it, because she enjoys it, right? Like, women should be, they're gonna grow from pursuing their passion, but this idea of, like, needing to accumulate power themselves, like, I need to be in control of this, I need to be in control of that, um, I need to take on this responsibility, take on that responsibility. I think it's driving women absolutely batshit insane. And it's the stress level it's up on them. A lot of this neuroticism and this, like, low self-esteem, and it gets externalized to everybody. Like, I see so much of it as coming from women being told that they need to take on more and more and more, that women have to do it all. Like, women, in some ways, they're the ones who have really been told they have to do it all. Like, you gotta get married, you gotta have kids, you gotta be hot, you gotta have a career, like, you gotta do all these things. It's a lot of pressure on women, and I think it's inevitable with that kind of programming, they bring that into relationships. What do you think?
I agree with you. I think you're almost pointing to how, like, when when feminine and masculine roles and cultures were more organized and could fit neater in a box, the pressure was by default more on the masculine. And then when all of that shifted, now more of it's on the woman. Right? You know, and so if more pressure gets put on the woman, then there's a sense of, if I can't be all these different things, it almost feels like you can't survive, right? Like, you can't
Yeah.
rely. Um, I agree with you. I think a lot of women. Well, this is something, if I talk to women who are burnt out at work, for example, the sacrifice to resolve that, if we're talking solutions, something's got to give,
Yeah.
right? And it maybe defaults to giving with your emotional bandwidth that in your personal relationships, and then it's really screwing you up because you're just being boss bitch, and then you're taking it out on maybe your, like, husband or whatever, or, like, your social life, maybe, like, you cope for it by, like, drinking every night, and then you're either working or, like, getting trashed, and then all the liabilities out that, right? Or you have some sort of, you know limit with being a boss bitch, which means, disappointing people, uh, and or leaving money on the table,
Mhm.
and or guilt because you want to be, like, nurturing the people on your team or your clients or whatever, but you need to, like, have some time for yourself to sleep or, like, whatever it is,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
all. So then even being in a feminine, healthy energy, and also achieving shit also requires shit of you,
Mhm.
and I'm speaking from experience too, having to do that. So, like, and both of these things support your point, right? It's like you're still asking the feminine to show up in all these different ways that require, you know, whatever, to even relax as the prerequisite. So I agree with you. Like, I think it's really stressing everybody out. I think that challenge might be um, the current structures of what's demanded of working women. I think if I was making another prediction, I don't think they're going to survive either. And I
No.
think that's already happening. I think there's already cultural things like echoing through Instagram reels and stuff of like, you can't work like men. You can't work out
Yeah,
like, oh my God, now we do Pilates. Oh my God, now like, you know,
and honestly, I hope it's gonna be like a peaceful revolution because
it is.
no, because of if you look at at South Korea right now, I mean, this was interesting, and I don't know, they have such a
I don't know what that is.
South Korea?
What's happening in South Korea?
So
That, but I don't know
South
what's going
Korea
on in
has
South
like the lowest birth rate in the world.
Oh,
It's like 0.5 fertility. So it's like one baby for every like 4 people or something like that, right? So,
why? Because they're working?
well, East Asian societies have like really rigid cultural norms. So like women were expected to do all the traditional things for the men. So the men first it started like the men had to take on all this like corporate work, right? When South Korea industrialized, just like Japan, it became like super heavy work culture. And then and women were supposed to had very traditionally defined roles. Then women, you kind of had like the feminist movement came in, so women then were expected to also have these careers, but they were also still expected to do the traditional roles, which really wasn't which so like the issues that we're having in Western societies in Japan and especially South Korea are like extra magnified. And the result of it has been like extreme like when we talk about there's a political divide between like men and women, like in South Korea, it's fucking extreme right now. Like the person there was almost a military coup a couple months ago and it was like incel apparently like leader of an incel movement. The young men are totally like radicalized basically to like it's not out of the realm of possibility that they may just like take arms and overthrow the entire system.
What? I'm so
Yeah.
surprised that you're saying that's happening in Asia because I feel like interesting. I would almost like if I think of the term incel, I think it's such a like a Western
Yeah,
guy.
yeah, and it's
Like,
overused. It's overused
and
when we
if you're
talk
saying that's happening in Asia in response to like the women being able to like conquer or whatever, that in
well, we talk about it in Western culture, but like Western culture is not in as bad shape as East Asia. It's not actually. I mean, there are other issues that the West has that East Asia doesn't have. But when it comes to male female dynamics and birth rates and stuff, it's even more extreme over there because they have a stronger work culture, a much stronger like, you got like that's the tiger mom, the quintessential kind of tiger mom thing, right? Um, so those dynamics are really falling apart. I don't by the record, I don't know that it's gonna come to get that, but it's interesting to think about it when it does do things eventually hit a tipping point where people have had enough. Um, in the West, I do think though it's much more of a conversation that's you can already see like where the culture's moving right now. You can see that there's like a like late like there's gonna be some like negotiated surrender kind of thing
I think
that's
no, I really, really believe in that. I do think it's going to be I think I don't know if it's going to happen in my lifetime, but I think we're on the way there. And I think that if we were to talk about an idealistic landing place where the feminine can like be feminine and be this new unprecedented version, but also be in the working thing because we can't go back to the past. If we're to just do a thought experiment and like imagine that, and we say that there's going to be like healthy versions of that, and they're breaking all the paradigms of like not working as much as men and da 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 da. I think that the woman's responsibility on that side needs to be qualitative. And what I mean by that is
mm,
you can't use being a woman as an excuse to not honor your responsibilities by being like, oh, I'm for example, I can't work this many hours because it's time for me to be a woman and it's my menstrual cycle or something, right? But when you are showing up, is your qualitative output justifying
mhm,
that? Or are
yeah,
you all of a sudden deciding it's time to be like use your woman card?
yeah,
That's the big difference, right? Because it is true. Like if we're saying it's true, then you still have to be responsible for honorability in alignment with your feminine stuff. You can't just weaponize it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you, and I think it's just a lot of it is just gonna be more honesty across the board, and part of it is gonna be men, you know, not allowing bullshit, not letting themselves get manipulated. I mean, the boomer generation was a very, very manipulated generation, and it passed on that sort of manipulation down, and I think, the red pill is an extreme reaction to it, and it can sustain on its own, but I do think it's gonna start to moderate out over the coming years. I mean, I'm not saying it's gonna get more intense in the short term, but I think as we get into the 2030s, there's gonna be
Are there is?
2030s?
Really?
You think it's gonna take longer?
I don't know.
I think things happen a lot faster than we give them credit for.
Yeah,
Like, um,
I hope
I'm
so.
at the same time, I'll also admit I tend to when I see the beginning of a trend, I tend to think the trend's here. It's like it's just like I can see the wave, but the wave can take some time to happen. But I really like I can see on the internet, and I've been tapped in for a decade now into this. The the lack of tolerance among men for nonsense, which comes from like distorted neurotic feminine impulse in society, it's the fuse is ending. And and even if you look astrologically, if you want to go to astrology, all these
Mhm.
planets have been in Pisces, which is a very, very feminine sign. They've been in Pisces for like 15 years, which is when wokeism came in. And it's like everything is, formless and who knows what's right or who knows what's wrong.
That's known as the red card, red pill card on the table right now. But yes, I'm aware of what you're talking about.
And they're moving out of Pisces. They're going into Aries, which is a very masculine fighting sign. So a lot of the energy, like even just in the macro, it's the stars have determined it. It's going to be changing, but I can feel it. And exactly to your point, I do think a lot of women are ready for it. They just don't know how to. A lot of them just don't know how to step out of it, and I don't blame them. Like guys need to be a little bit more compassionate. Like they don't know. None of us know. This is and it's a very different like it's easier in it for men in some ways to figure out how to become men because society is in general so masculinized. It may be hard for them to like society might hamper their ability to fully actualize in that sense, to realize power, but
It's just more
there's no one talks about femininity in its real form, so nobody even knows what it is. Like we're asking women to do something that they don't even they've been told their entire life makes them weak. Like that's a really big ego death. It's a
You don't
really
think women are talking about it? I think they're talking about it.
I do think they are talking about it. I think it's happening more and more. Um, but a lot of them still have like it's not it's more and more like niche voices coming forward. Um,
Yeah, but it's gonna stay that way because the niche stuff is not what gets virality. So
so
it almost like
you don't think it's going to start to become just a thing in general?
yeah, I do.
Yeah.
And the reason I was like, oh, you gonna think it's gonna happen in 2030s isn't because I'm naturally patient, by the way.
Mhm.
It's because I too have thought that like, oh wow, this is coming, so it's coming tomorrow. And then I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, and then I went through a few experiences where I'm like, that is not the right way to look at this, you know? And then so now with like as big of a deal as what I perceive as the collective karmic lesson happening right now, I'm gonna be like, all right, maybe it won't be in my lifetime. I hope it happens sooner. But I'll just like keep doing what I gotta do. What did I just come from?
I think 5
Oh,
years is a long time. I'm trying to like like it's not gonna happen. It's happening now. That's like what I want to say. It's like, well, I'm gonna give it 5 years.
no, I do think that we're on the way to those niche whatever things getting bigger and taking more attention because everything's breaking down with what gets the most attention.
Which
So it's
pushes masculine energy of men into the forefront because then like things without systems to sustain a lot of this stuff, men have to like step up naturally and deal with it.
Yeah, and for men, I agree with you on the main level of it being a little bit easier, not because it's not hard for men, but because it's just a little bit more like linear, right? Like, for example, if we were to use like the parasocial example, like of a guy, um, like, you got to like work, and your avatar might be like how you represent your work in the digital world. But for a woman, the mirror energy, there's just so much more layers to go through as like your avatar reflection. And it requires more fluidity. So
Mhm.
it's just more contradicting and complex. Whereas the guy is just more like it's this or it's this or it's this. Which is easier to learn, I think.
Yes. No, I think that's true. Um, but I like, and I don't know whether it's because I love my work. So to what extent does it even feel like work? But I really learned this about myself in prison, that I really like to work. Like I'm definitely, I don't know that I want to call like myself a workaholic. I I don't know, but like I enjoy being busy. And it doesn't mean like I book into my day like doing things for myself. Like I'll get a massage, you know what I mean? I'll take time in the gym. Like it's not that I don't do things for myself. I don't neglect self-care, but I like working, and I don't feel, I literally don't feel like, oh, I have all this extra stuff to do and I have to wake up. Like I wake up at 4 or 5 a.m. most mornings to do like writing for the book. Like I doesn't mean I'm not stressed. Like I am definitely stressed. But what I'm trying to say is I kind of enjoy the stress. Like I enjoy the pressure. I don't like to have pressure completely taken off of me. If I have pressure completely taken off of me, I can feel myself become like dissipated. It's like I'm like, well, just fucking wasting my time doing stuff.
Mm.
And I don't I don't see that same like satisfaction. Like I have a real satisfaction of having all this stuff on my plate that like I haven't seen the case with women as much. Like that when they have that all on their plate, that that's when it's like, especially if they can't take time for themselves, that it's like a crumpling feeling, and that's when all like the fear and the neuroticism comes out. And I can see like, wow, we're really just there's a different wiring here because I can really eat shit. Like I can do it and I can come out and be like, that was good, like feel a little bit more of a man now, but I don't think that women get that same kind of validation from it.
No, because it's the opposite reinforcement to being able to just receive, you
Yeah,
know? And,
exactly.
like, I agree that there are ways to, like, operate from that with work, 'cause I do it, but it's definitely hard. No,
Mhm,
it's not hard to, like, sit there and receive, but it's hard it's a there's so there's so much external, negative feedback, reinforcement for learning how to do that, it doesn't surprise me that it's rarer or harder to get to that place. And I think it's really cool what you just narrated as the antonym to that, because if you um I think a lot of guys who are successful don't have what you just narrated, which is, even if they are achieving and active and like like their work, they almost don't get it, it's almost like they might as well not like their work,
mhm,
because they don't have the awareness that you just said to me. And and without that awareness, the perspective is more like, if I'm not doing anything, I feel useless. So I'm going to do something to avoid feeling useless.
mhm.
Whereas for you, it's like more about, if I'm not doing something, I don't, I need the stress to like protect my edge. And those sound similar, but they're very different. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
I understand what you're saying. I mean, I don't wanna give myself so much credit because I admit I do feel a little useless if I'm
Yeah. I
doing
mean,
for too long. Like I do feel useless, and I think maybe that's why I don't know whether that to what extent what like
well, we feel good
I
about
don't
feeling
think it's
useful.
unhealthy because, I'm not when I say I like to work, like, I mean, like, work 60 hours a week. I don't mean, like, work 80 to 100 hours a week. I mean, I could, I have done that, but, things start to fall apart when you get to those extreme workloads. I'm just saying, like, I enjoy being busy, and I feel like I'm always working because I'm always doing things, but due to the nature of my work, they're not always, like, linear like it might be in a different job, you know what I mean?
What I'm trying to use you for an example in different words is okay, so let's say from a core human thing, I think we all want to feel useful, right? Like
Yeah.
women as helpful, men as like, oh, you know, she, whatever. So if we're to say the lens of useful, then there's like a usefulness level that you need to earn, right?
Yes.
And but then what I'm saying is the word unhealthier example of that, because we all need to like earn feeling useful, and that's good. Otherwise, we feel a little bit useless, and I think that's fine. But where the diminishing return point might be is when I'm not earning, it's like an insatiable level of earning usefulness, to where if the guy is not being useful, he has zero sense of I'm useful.
Well, I think actually a lot of what you're suggesting here is a sense of usefulness to, like, the people in his life as well. Like, if like,
Hmm.
there needs to be some sort of acknowledgement that, "Oh, like,
Yeah,
my wife thinks I'm useful, or I brought in this money."
that's a really
And
good.
I'm not saying I'm, like, immune to any of this stuff, but I I find, like, I know the work I do is, like, rewarding anyway, and I know it's all positive, but it's I don't know, I love my work. It's like I have a great gig, you know? So
Yeah.
it's fulfilling on a lot of different levels. Um, but yeah, I would be happy to take on more if it meant, you know, my wife to have to take on less or to have more balance, right? Like, it doesn't I just found this whole thing so interesting, and but this program that a lot of women have, it's like they have to take on more. They feel like, you know, it's because they're afraid, so they have to control, and so they are controlling this and this and this, and those are all burdens that get put on them. It's really fascinating. It's really, really tragic.
And it's reasonable too. Like I'm gonna say something, I don't know, whatever I'm gonna say. In unreasonable moments where like the objectively uh not good, I wouldn't call it bad, but it's not good thing to do was trust that I would receive
Mhm.
in some way, on some level. Maybe that won't make sense to everybody watching this, but I know it makes sense to you. I was never punished for that trust.
Yeah, yeah,
So that's where you get real woo woo with it, right? And so, like, if you're just looking at the life feedback or the avatar or the social media or whatever, and you don't have any of that, then it makes so much sense why you need to like be more fearful that if you don't, you know, do XYZ or like go beyond the thing, that everything's going to fall apart. There's 150% of evidence to back that up.
yeah,
So that's where you have to like transcend it kind of. And like, it's so unreasonable to ask and advise people, you know? Um,
yeah, and I think, you know, unfortunately, because this is just how life is, sometimes sometimes you do put trust in someone and it doesn't work.
yeah.
Like, sometimes you have a guy who dedicated his life to serving his wife and his family, and he cheated on her, left him, right? So he's burned. A lot of those guys get filtered through the red pill, understandably, you know? What went wrong? I don't personally think the ultimate lesson from that is you should never trust again. It's to learn, you know, who are you really dealing with? Because clearly you were dealing with somebody who was, you know, probably in the parasitic category, right? Or you were really unaware of other things that you weren't doing. You know, you thought you were doing everything right, but you really weren't. And there are horror stories in the female corollary too. Like a lot of like radical feminism stuff, they'll have stories of like ex trad wife who like I didn't work. I trusted my husband. He controlled all this stuff. I could barely even eat. I could do, you know, all this stuff. Like horror story stuff, really. Totally understandable horror story stuff. You have a woman who completely surrendered and trusted the man she was with who used her, right? But the same exact, you know, arguments apply. Like, does that mean you should never trust another man again? What was it about this guy? Why did you trust him? Were there things that you thought you were doing that, were you completely the victim? You always, I mean, you always have to take this introspective, right? Introspection and the dynamic, find out what happened. But you're always going to have people who got burned. 'Cause people got
You
burned. It's life. You get
you
burned in
have
life.
you have this iterate you see this everywhere. I'm gonna make a silly sales analogy next, and I'm saying it out loud so I don't forget. Um, in our like online world, you'll commonly see one of the red pill extremist criticism of women is like, at this certain point she's been burned by some guy in the past, so she's too messed up to like deal with, right? So that points to the like trust issue thing and kind of exploits it, right?
Mhm.
But it's interesting because I think those exact voices are kind of overlooking the fact that when you perceive that, for the male corollary, it's maybe it was what you just said, pointed at, in my opinion, which was like, um, you like provided for this woman and she like deceived you. And you learned to not trust signs to invest in the woman. So now you don't trust the feminine and signs to invest in them. So now, like this corollary is like just somebody tried at some point something, and now they have that trust. And the reason I'm going to a sales analogy next is no matter if we're not talking about relationships or we are, or we're talking about even like platonic trust issues or business trust issues, you see this even with non-human decisions.
Mhm.
For example, the prospect who has bought into a scam and they want to invest in a course again or a coaching program again or a
So
community again or something, you even see this behavior and it's like, well, last time I bought into this, blah, 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 and you handle all the reasons that you shouldn't trust. And I've arrived at that conversation point where I said almost like very similar to what you just said, where it's like the lesson is not never trust again or never try to get help again. The lesson is what went wrong last time or what was missing or what did I not know, and how do I show up to the second iteration of that opportunity with that lesson learned to apply it and give myself a chance to experience the positive version of where things went wrong last time. And it can even happen when you're just talking about a non-human product.
yeah.
So it's so sad because we're all human problems are still trying to reconcile this shit, even with non-human things. It's so like it's everywhere.
No, this is like such a good analogy because it's true. Like people get burned. Like I've had to deal with, prospective clients who have said like, "Well, I work with this other coach and it was all bullshit." Like he just had me like do the same thing over and over again, and I didn't want to like it. He just had me do like cold approaching girls like drunk at bars, and like I don't drink and I don't like that. I'm like, look, this isn't how I do things. Okay. Like,
And it's very obvious you don't. So,
yeah,
like, if they were to go through the Pat Stedman, like, kind of look at your YouTube, look at your Twitter, look at your maybe even buy your course, there can be all the objective evidence and your testimonials, and like there you can still like see that like emotion and fear that you're speaking with, right? Because you have
yeah.
all the evidence that that's not how you do things.
No, it's not. It's
But it's
not.
a trust issue.
Yeah, it's a trust, and it's generalized, and typically they'll come over. They just need to kind of like vent, and they need to be heard. You understand this obviously from sales as well, but um, I've been doing this for 10 years. I've never had like a negative review about working with me. Never had one. I've worked with over 300 guys. I'm not saying that everybody got like phenomenal results. Like I definitely have had guys who have not, right? For various reasons. Like nobody has a 100% success rate on every client, but none of them felt like I scammed them. None of them felt betrayed by the experience. You know what I mean? Like, and if we parted early, which was very, very uncommon, happened maybe like 3 clients over that decade, like it was always on good terms, you know? Anyway,
That's a really outlier thing because even like think of the best restaurant in town or something, they're gonna have negative reviews, even if they
Yeah,
did everything right, right? So that's because it's vulnerable to human perception or like issues, or somebody's gonna show up and have a bad time anyways. So that's a really cool thing to like claim. I can also say the same. Anyone I've been romantically connected with, I've
yeah,
never been on bad terms, and it's so nice because I've never met somebody who can say that.
yeah, yeah. That's the same with me too.
I've met a lot
I
of
mean,
people.
it doesn't look. I don't know what's in somebody's heart. You know what I mean? I don't know if they might have some resentment about something, but they know I didn't act in bad faith towards them. You know what I mean? They know I wasn't trying to like do something awful to them. Um, but oh
That's so
man, that was. But what did I want to go back to with your sales analogy? Oh yeah, so these guys, they're projecting. I mean, people, this the term gets used. Maybe I don't want to say it gets used too much because it's the right term. What else are you going to use? But they say, oh, this happened to her. That means she can never. She's like lost her ability to pair bond. I'm like, you've lost your ability to pair bond. You have. It's like, no, I haven't. Okay, when was the last serious relationship? Well, I can't be in a serious relationship because all girls are messed up. Like, do you fucking see it? Do you fucking see that you are the problem? You are the single variable here. And all you have to do is look around you and you can see other people are getting together still, and you're not. So how can you say it's this universal thing? I mean, it drives me crazy, but I guess it just is what it is. You know what I mean? Like you can use them as cautionary tales to other people and like pay attention to this in yourself because it's going to be a tendency. If you've gotten burned, part of you is going to want to pull back and you can get bitter. But like I've had to go in whenever I work with clients on this stuff, we look at individual circumstances, right? And sometimes a girl has some things that are like, negative experiences. Maybe she's dated a little bit too much, right? But her actual behavior in the relationship is not bad, right? Like they're dating, she's operating in good faith, she's operating in a relatively, mentally healthy manner. So these guys, though, if they've consumed too much of the platitudes, they're unable to see the forest for the trees. Or like it's like, well, look, she's acting okay. So you can keep an eye out on things, but they don't always like these experiences don't always lead to the same problems in
yeah.
every situation. And sometimes, like something that we might perceive as relatively minor, like one failed relationship, might be enough to mess somebody up pretty badly.
100%, because people repeat patterns, right? So you can keep, no matter how like unhealthy or uncomfortable or miserable that pattern makes you. You and I both know that a lot of people repeat their patterns for life.
Yeah.
So when this guy is like saying like, her, or the example you just used, for example, her ability to pair bond is wrong. No, you have an inability to pair bond. All he's choosing there is to keep repeating what he's attracting,
Mhm.
right? Whereas there's the real lesson or challenge to break through is what's required of you to influence the trajectory of something. That's a change.
That's it.
That's a pattern to break.
That's it. So I mean, you gotta learn to look at the signs, but there's things that correspond to issues, but well, at the end of the day, you're not looking just at that. You're looking at how do they act? Like what is their intention? Can you work with them? Are they treating you well? Like that's the stuff that matters. Like the rest of it is they're just signals that maybe I dig a little bit here, maybe I look a little bit here. But
I think what was helpful there, and tell me if this has been your experience, but and I resonate with this, and I think you would too. And it's been productive in conversations where I help people. Um, when you are like confronting a challenge like that, whether it's a woman or a man, because I think even this is a danger zone because it's like I'm almost like positively reinforcing the like masculinization of women, but this works on women too. Almost like I'm gonna sound real manipulative for a second. Almost appealing to rebellion with what, like, say a guy opens up to you about this, like that, and the solution is for him to influence the trajectory and she's behaving well, da, 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 like almost appealing to the rebellion in it, right? Where it's like, oh my gosh, the whole like guy world is not going to get you like doing this, or your family or whatever culture is, or and how do I say this? Um, like to forge your own world with for a purpose such as like your life partner. It almost helps to appeal to like a rebellion and like a carve your own path
Mhm.
thing. And I'm not saying it in like a bad way. I'm saying it in of like, oh, it's a good cause, and you're gonna have to go up to the challenge of defying all of this and deal with that, but you're gonna conquer something. And um because you feed into like, first of all, a good cause, second of all, like you reframe, um you reframe turning down all of the understanding and validation of things that you might be anchoring your sense of self-worth in, but you make it worthwhile, and it is positive. Because I think another big challenge there that people do with transcending, where they're trying to deviate, like leave the 9 to 5 to have an online career, leave their patterns to influence a modern relationships healthier trajectory. It's you have to rebel against whatever the status quo has been.
Yeah, I mean, I think, eh, I mean, what you're speaking to it, I think is at a very deeper level now, because now we're talking about almost like identity and how you view the course of your life, right? No, this is really important though. Like, uh, it's a whole nother topic. Um, but like who you look at yourself as determines your actions. Like, it
Mm.
determines how you interact with people. Like, I have some guys who they're a really big issue with women. It's not that they don't know what to do. It's that they have no identity as a man who's good with women.
Yeah.
And they have to change that identity. And some of them have a really hard time even wrapping their head around the concept of like, what is my identity? But I think for us on our journey, when you decide you want something different, that's like you're gonna get opposed by the normies. Like, it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen immediately. And you're gonna lose friends because you had all these undifferentiated, really frankly exchangeable friendships. And it is a journey. And I think it's worthwhile to view it as an adventure and to view it as something for you personally, right? That's how I viewed things when it came to prison.
Yeah, that's why I was like, you I think you'll get what I'm saying, even like I'm struggling to articulate
Yeah,
it.
I mean, like, sucked. Absolutely
Yeah.
sucked. But it was like, okay, well, it's my story. It's gonna be it's another it's a fun chapter of the story. I can make fun out of this. I don't have to let it um be something that destroys me. I think that's the case, like, you get disapproval because you date this certain type of woman, or whatever, like, because everybody has their norms, and I have to say, like, a lot of the norms today don't even make any sense anyway. The norms today, like, whether it's red pill stuff on one hand or whether it's, like, super feminist stuff on the other, like, what is the expectation that you're supposed to have? You know what I mean? Like, the expectation at this point is basically that nobody's ever good enough.
Yeah, and if a bad outcome is inevitable and you don't take any responsibility for influencing the trajectory of things, whether it's on a micro or macro level, then what a cop out, right? Because then you don't even have to try.
Exactly. Well, Trina, what do you think? You think we'll call it here? This has been good.
Yeah, that was good.
All right. We'll see you guys next time. Yeah,
Wow,
well,
that got
the new
deep.
the new Wizard of Oz here, I feel like this is starting to get deep. We're gonna save some of the stuff. We got more stuff to talk about as always. So we'll see you guys back on here in a couple weeks.